Welcome back, people, to part two of What If Shaq Never Left the Orlando Magic. If you listen to the first part, we dove into Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic side of What If He Never Left the Orlando Magic. Now we get into the second part and chapter two with him going to the Los Angeles Lakers. As you heard, I'm joined by my guy Omar. Like I said, we are doing this series, the What If series. We are really excited. We can't wait till you guys listen to this. It is such a great project that me and Omar have been, in the lab working on it. So excited to get into the second phase of What If Shaq Never Left the Orlando Magic. Omar, what's going on, man?
What's up, Chris? Man, as fun as part one was, I feel like part two might be even more fun because there's so many layers to the Lakers side of this story. And it's really going to be just a ride, I think, to just kind of go down the different winding paths, especially when you think about how we kind of went on these winding paths from part one. I feel like you're probably going to have a little bit more of that with part two. So I'm excited, man. Let's just dive into it.
Yeah, and like with part one, there's so many layers of things that changes the whole league. And what we talked about with the Orlando side with Shaq, in Orlando, we're gonna get a lot of that in. So when we talk about the Los Angeles Lakers side of what if Shaq never left the Orlando Magic, so let's get right into it. So obviously, we're getting to the part where Shaq is getting ready to leave, and there's a guy who happens to be the logo, that has a big part of this, and that is Mr. Jerry West. So Jerry West, is running stuff in Laker Town and all that. And obviously we know what he's done in the league and all that. One of the greatest players of all time. He wants to make a big splash. And as we see this, he's going to make several splashes in this offseason and all that. But obviously we know with the Lakers, they're known for showtime. They're known for having great centers, Kareem, Wilt, so he's trying to add another one and all that. And Shaq, and we talked about this, right? Shaq wanted to get paid more than Hakeem, right?
Yep.
And all that. So that's a big thing in this. And Shaq was about to get paid. He wanted the money, right? He was all about getting paid and all that. And he had a number. He had a number he wanted, and he's trying to get that number. He wants to get paid more than Hakeem and all that. So he's trying to get that number and all that. And Jerry West is trying to make moves and all that. So, talk to me more about Jerry West and how he's trying to get Shaq to come to LA.
So it's important to think about Jerry West in this capacity. Like you mentioned, Chris, great player back in the 60s. And obviously, he also was a part on the coaching side and also the front office side during the Showtime Lakers. So him as an executive and as a player, he sees two things happen. When he was a player, they went to the finals all the time and they lost, right?
Lost. Was he 1-8, 1-8,
yeah,
1-9, something like that?
Yeah, some shit like that. And they would always lose the Celtics. Bill Russell got a lot of his rings on the back of Elgin Baylor and Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain not showing up and beating them in the finals. And then as an executive and coach, he sees Magic Johnson, Kareem, and what it takes to win in LA, right? And he knows he needs a center, an elite center. At that time, they have Vlade Divac, who was a great player, a really good player.
Really good player.
Probably way ahead of his time from the capacity of a passing big man, but he wasn't Kareem, he wasn't Wilt. Shaq was, right? So Shaq is the target. That's who they want to get. And when you really think about if this never happens, if Orlando pays the money that Shaq would have wanted to stay there, then we start looking at Jerry West in a very different light, because after he gets that, he eventually helps facilitate further acquisitions in the second part of the Lakers dynasty with Kobe Bryant, who we'll talk about in a little bit. He also had a hand with the Clippers in building their current version. He also was in Memphis when they kind of built out the Grind City team with Zach Randolph and Mike Conley and those guys. So he built a reputation, and it started with acquiring Shaq, of being an excellent talent evaluator, of team building, and doing all this stuff. If he doesn't get Shaq, he doesn't get that reputation. right?
No,
He
absolutely not.
becomes like, oh yeah, you kind of developed this shooting guard you traded with Charlotte, and maybe you kind of got a couple good years in the West, but
Hmm.
if you don't get Shaq, you probably don't win those titles. And if you don't win those titles, you don't have the cachet to be able to do stuff, right? And that to me becomes the big what if when it comes to Jerry West, right? You wonder how elevated is he? Obviously, he's the logo. So as a player, there's infinite respect. But you think about we respect Michael Jordan the player. We don't necessarily respect Michael Jordan the executive, and
Yeah,
that's the route, and that's what makes Jerry so interesting, right? Is because he was great as a player, like you said, one of the best shooting guards of all time, and he was excellent as an executive as well. So he kind of did both things, and that's what makes him so legendary. But if you take one of those things away, well, he was just a good player who never won. He's Patrick Ewing, with one title, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it is that Jerry West's legacy was really made when Shaq went to LA.
it's really true. And then, like you said, if this doesn't get pulled off, maybe the next part of this dynasty doesn't get pulled off, or maybe it's not as impactful. Because you need two to tango to try to win championships, and we saw that.
Mhm.
So maybe Kobe Bryant still is a Laker, but maybe he's not. He doesn't win the championships early on, and maybe where he's going through, where a lot of guys in the '90s were going through, just doing it by themselves and falling short. And now, how do we look at the Kobe Bryant now? Is he going through that T-Mac phase where he's super talented, but he can't get past the first round? Does he have that type of career now because he doesn't have Shaq? So this is why I love doing this, because now you go through all these different scenarios. Is like Shaq doesn't go to LA. Okay, maybe Kobe still is a Laker, but it is a completely different route for Kobe. Like
Yeah.
maybe he breaks down, his body breaks down because he's carrying the team earlier now. Instead of where he and we've seen him by himself and how much of a struggle that was. And now
Mhm.
doing this early on in a career where he's still trying to find his way. That because it's not like he wasn't the Black Mamba right away.
Yeah.
He had to wait a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
there was a
like
struggle, and then you also think about like if they don't get Shaq, well, they're going to have to go after a big man. So let's assume they still trade Divac to get Kobe. Let's just say he
mhm,
just saw it, whatever. They got to fill in that center spot. So you start wondering, you're looking at the landscape in the mid '90s. Who do they go after? And obviously, anybody you end up getting becomes a downgrade
course.
from Shaquille O'Neal, right? Do they do what Orlando ended up doing and get Ronnie Cycle? Like is that the move, right? And you start to wonder. It's like, all right, if you're the Lakers and you're kind of with every passing year, you're fading away and away from the Magic Johnson era and what made that era so magical in the '80s. And you wonder if they start to get desperate, right? And go after somebody who's not as good as him. And it makes you wonder how they would have done that. And again, that's even before you get into any conversation about what Kobe Bryant could have become.
Yeah.
That's because if you're Jerry West at that time, you're trying to get star power into LA. And who are you going to get if you whiff on Shaq? That becomes the $1 million question for the Lakers. And by whiffing on him, and if you get somebody who's just okay, then you're in a situation where you're just another okay GM. You're not that guy, right? And that
Mhm.
that becomes the interesting conversation about that. But you mentioned Kobe, so that becomes the next piece, right? Which is what is Kobe's career without Shaq? I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling to think about.
It really is. Omar, what if they trade him?
Mhm. I
That's
mean,
not out of
likely
the realm. Because
because
think
it's
about it. We
LA.
look at it's LA.
Mhm.
If you don't have Shaq, you're probably, you're either battling for like an 8 seed, at best, and that's not good enough in LA.
You
So
look at the
what if
team
they
then
go crazy?
too.
What they could have done something drastic like that. Like it's
Mhm.
not because we still don't know what Kobe is. And
Mhm.
once Shaq gets there, we're still trying to figure out. Even throughout the years with Shaq, he's still developing. We still don't know. Remember, he still
Yeah.
got Eddie Jones, still got all these guys around. Eddie Jones, McMahon, all these guys. We're still trying to figure out if this kid is really what he's all hyped up to be, or is he just another hyped up kid? So like,
And
what if they're like, you know what? we're desperate. We got to trade him for
Mm.
I don't know who, but what if they just like they give up on? There's a world where they give up on Kobe, and Kobe is only 3 years in with the Lakers, and he's somewhere else. Who knows? I don't know where, but he's somewhere else. That really could have happened if Shaq is not a Laker.
And then you think about big picture with Kobe is one of the big defining pieces of his legacy is that he was a Laker for life. He never,
Yes.
a lot of people who are like big Kobe fans, and when they compare him to LeBron James or whatever, say, hey, well, Kobe never switched teams. He stuck through it when things got rough. That goes away if you're in, because at the end of the day, you're in LA. There's a decent chance that you just say, you know what? This isn't really working. We're not a long-term rebuild type of organization. We want to win right now.
No, it's
and then you start looking around and you start thinking like, okay, well, what if they start, poking around at other teams, throughout the league and try like, what if they say, you know what, we need a good shooting guard who's ready to win now. Let's go get Reggie Miller, right? Like, who's to say that? And that changes Reggie Miller's entire dynamic, right? And I say Reggie because he's a local California guy. You could he played at UCLA. There's connections there. With the LA Lakers and all that. So you start to wonder, and then we start saying, oh, maybe Kobe's just this really good, score first shooting guard who was just okay, and he doesn't become Kobe Bryant, Mamba mentality, that whole thing. And then beyond that, Kobe really defined himself in the second part after Shaq, right? He dealt with the whole, obviously all the accusations and stuff, but also having to redefine himself as a leader when he wasn't just Shaq's young sidekick. He was the guy, and Pau Gasol was the number 2, right? As opposed to when he was the number 2 to Shaq. And the even deeper layer, they probably don't get to the finals as well. And, the 2004 Pistons aren't this like crazy cult classic of a team, right? Because like if they just beat like the Portland Trailblazers or something, right? It was like, oh, okay, good win, and good for you. You won the championship, right? But you're not the team that dismantled this dynasty. And that becomes the interesting aspect of it all, especially because when you're looking at Kobe, like you can't expect him to be like 21, 22 at the point when they started winning championships and just being the only guy. That's just not how the NBA works. You typically need 2. So yeah, you start to wonder is he really the revered guy that we know of today? And is he there long term? And obviously there's no way to know, but I think more likely than not, the Lakers move on from him if they have a couple of middling seasons, maybe a couple years where they don't make the playoffs.
It's crazy to think that, right? It really is crazy to think that there is a world of that happens, and Kobe is on a different team, and how we look at Kobe now maybe is different because how we love Kobe Bryant because of right. We always hear about the mom mentality, but he was with the Lakers for 20 years. Went through the ups and downs and all that. Had Shaq, and then went through those years where trying to figure out 8 seed and all that, and he did mingle with leaving. There was a few times he mingled. He thought he was going to be a Clipper, or he was on his way to be a Bull and all that, to follow his idols' steps in Chicago and all that. But maybe that's different. Maybe we look at Kobe the way we look at some of these guys who don't win championships. What if there's a chance he doesn't win a championship? Do we look in this? Is he in that right? Barkley? Yeah, he's Tracy McGrady, right? And look at how we look at T-Mac now. We knew T-Mac was just as good as Kobe, but Kobe had Shaq. Kobe was able to he had better structure, obviously, and all that. So we know the talents were. Hey, there's some people who say T-Mac was more talented, but he didn't have Shaq. He wasn't able to get Gasol and be on a stable franchise and all that. Maybe we look.
Then you think
we look at it differently now. Maybe he's T-Mac, and it's just crazy.
You really look at the landscape of the West then too. Like at that point, when Kobe is drafted, the Sonics are good, the Jazz are good, really good. Obviously, getting to 2 finals in a row. The Blazers are on the come up, and then Sacramento ends up getting on the come up later on with C-Web and Stojakovic and Bibby, and maybe those guys get a title. Like, imagine we'd be living in a world where
Wow,
the Sacramento Kings have won the
are
title,
world
right?
champions. Yeah, because that changes. Yeah, that changes Sacramento. I totally forgot about that
And
aspect.
also,
Yep.
if they don't get Shaq, do they try and get Weber? Is my thing, right? Because around that time, Weber was kind of bouncing around Golden State, Washington, before he finds a home in Sacramento. And you start to wonder, like, do the Lakers say, "Well, we didn't get Shaq. Next best thing, let's get Chris Webber," right? And
Yeah, you're right. Because I was thinking about what would have been reasonable trade candidates around that time, and honestly, Chris Webber would have been. He's kind of like a Showtime type of player, right? He's very flashy. He was a great passer. Can yam on you. He kind of had that Showtime feel to him, and that would have been a player that maybe definitely would fit with LA and all that.
what's the ceiling of that team once Kobe kind of elevates after 3, 4, 5 years with Chris Webber? I think it's obviously a lower ceiling than with Shaq. Shaq is he was a top 5 player at that time. And what is that ceiling like? I feel like it's a conference finals team, right? Where it's a team that could go to the conference finals. I don't know if it's a team that could win the whole thing, and
I don't know, because what are the other pieces? We know about Derek Fisher. We know about Rick Fox.
Yeah.
We know about Robert Horry hitting big shots and all that. What do those players look like now? Because they benefited greatly from having Shaq, because they were going to have wide open shots because people were going to double and triple team Shaq. Shaq kicks it out. They're going to be open. That's why they were able to hit a lot of big shots.
You wonder if they keep Van Exel longer, right? And because I think Van Exel's a good fit with Weber. He might have not been the greatest fit with Shaq. I think Eddie Jones still goes because you got to make way for Kobe. But you gotta.
But what if they're like, we kind of need Eddie Jones. What if they keep him around?
Yeah, I mean, let's say you do, right? So you're looking at Van Exel, Kobe, Eddie Jones, C. Webb, and insert some guy at center. Maybe it's Eldon Campbell. We talked about him earlier. So like, that's a fun team. That's an athletic, fast, fun team. Again, do they win championships? Probably not.
That's probably capped out at like a second round maybe type of team. And if you keep doing that as the Lakers, that's not good enough. Yeah. So somebody's got to go.
Yeah.
So, maybe they keep sticking with that veteran type of team, and maybe they're like, all right, we got the young boy can probably get us a valuable asset in return. Maybe we got to deal with this Kobe kid, and, he hasn't yet hit, like we thought he would, in year 3, 4, that's when year 4, but he had Shaq. There's no Shaq in this scenario. So maybe they're like, it doesn't. We got Eddie Jones. He's proven he's an all-star. He's a great defender. Nick Van Exel can score. If they have Chris Webber in this scenario, he's an all-star and all that. We got 3 guys. We can we could trade the young guy and try to get someone in return, a vet in return, or something like that.
Longer range, though, Chris. Think about how many of the modern players have been influenced by Kobe. Jason Tatum, Devin Booker, our guy Julius Randle. These are guys who have been. Who either talked to Kobe, played with him briefly in some capacity, and were really influenced by the whole Mamba mentality thing. If he gets traded early in his career, I mean, again, I hate to keep on bringing up T-Mac, but it's kind of the T-Mac thing where, hey, great player, multiple teams, just, not that quite top level of type of player because he never won any championships. And how does the next generation of ballers, of hoopers, kind of really come in and not really have that kind of foundation?
He's not at that. He doesn't have that aura. He does.
Right.
He's like,
so who's the guy that you get the aura from, right?
But this is why, exactly. And like, it's like you said, we're bringing up T-Mac because we know the talent's there, but like, people don't view. You don't hear a lot of hoopers now talk about T-Mac the way they talk about Kobe now. Right.
Why is that? Because basketball, especially the NBA, is all about the story, right? It's all about the mythology of it. Like, it's the reason why people love Jordan, 6 for 6, right? Like, that's the thing. That's greatness. It's the reason why a lot of people kind of discredit LeBron. And, it's really all about just like this idea that you could do anything. And T-Mac had the ability to do anything until it came into the playoffs, right? Like that's just the reality of the situation. When he was in
Pretty
Toronto, when he
elevated.
was in Houston, it didn't. When he was in Orlando, it doesn't matter. He was always going to be that guy. Just for whatever reason, couldn't get it done. He wasn't. He wasn't Kobe in that respect. Well, if you take away Shaq, are we so certain that Kobe was Kobe, right? And will never know. And you're really, I think, banking on the fact that LA as a media market is impatient and they want success now. And would they be willing to wait 4 or 5 years for a 17, 18-year-old guy to develop into what he like? Look at somebody like Anthony Edwards today, right? He's in his third, fourth year and he's really starting to pop, right? And Minnesota as a market is going to be patient with a guy like that.
Yeah.
You
LA,
wonder if
no.
LA is going to be patient like that. They're probably not, right? It's LA, Chicago to some extent, New York. These are markets that kind of they want it now. Because hey, we're the big dogs. We're the ones filling up our arenas. We want you to win. We want to put out a winner all the time. And so you start to wonder if they just kind of get rid of him, not because he was bad, but because they were just kind of tired of waiting for the development to happen. But when you had Shaq, it's okay because you got the big dog, you got the top 5 player right there, and he could kind of shield some of that because when Kobe, number 8 era Kobe early on, he had some rough games, man. He would like chuck up air balls, he had a lot of missed shots, and you just start to wonder if they do move on from him, what does his career really look like? And I think it's pretty safe to say it probably doesn't look great, in comparison to what it is now, because we think 5 rings, Laker for life, 2 numbers retired, statue in front of the arena, that whole thing. And that doesn't happen, if they don't get Shaq.
Yeah, and his last game as an NBA player doesn't happen probably too. That magnitude of that game doesn't happen. So there's a lot of things that change if Shaq's not here. But there's another aspect of the whole Shaq thing and all that. And early on in his career, not having the coaching and all that because they were getting swept early on, like you said, dealing with the young Kobe Bryant and all that. So he goes to LA and there's not the success he's looking for. Doesn't happen. I mean, he saw some success in with Orlando going to a finals. Yeah, they got swept, but he beat Michael Jordan in that run to the finals and all that.
Yep.
So he got a piece of how it feels to get there. So he's figuring, and the allure of being a Laker, being one of those big, because there comes a lot of not just being a Laker, but now you're a Laker big man. Like we just mentioned,
there's lineage
Kareem,
there.
There's lineage there. Kareem, Wilt, there, there's a lot to and you feel that. You feel that. You see it in the rafters, you see the jerseys and all that. So there's some early failures in LA for Shaq and all that. And so let's talk a little bit about that, with all the coaching. And then obviously they finally, they get a certain guy from Chicago to come coach his team, Omar.
Yeah, it's Shaq at that point. You got to be frustrated, right? Because you're like, yeah, I was, dominant in the East, and now I get over here in LA where it's not really working out. And in the NBA, you always go to coaching first, right? And if it's a bad situation, the coach is always the first one to be blamed. We see it all the time now. A team goes on a losing streak. Oh, you got fired the coach. Remember when LeBron was in Miami, it was the first thing that when they kind of hit a rough patch, fire Spoelstra. And now we're just kind of like, can you imagine if the Miami Heat would have fired Spoelstra? Like, we think it's unthinkable because he's turned himself into like one of the best coaches in the league. So then, the Lakers end up capitulating to that because they're always going to capitulate to the star, and they go on and they get Phil Jackson, who is fresh off of winning 6 titles in 8 years with the Bulls. Yeah. And this, to me, is the most interesting one. We as Knicks fans looking at Phil Jackson in a weird way because we know he was a legendary Knicks player and a horrendous Knicks executive, right? But in Chicago, he's a
to say the least.
Yeah. That's putting it kindly, right? He was a legend in Chicago, right? And him doing it in LA solidified him as a top 5 coach of all time, right? And whereas, let's say they don't get Shaq. One, does he even go there? because this is a guy who just got done winning titles, 6 of them. And is this a guy who's like, well, you don't have a marquee player for me to even coach? But let's just say hypothetically,
that's a good one, Omar. I didn't even think about that. He doesn't even entertain it. He doesn't.
Yeah, like why would I go there? Like, yeah, it's a good market, but you guys don't have anybody. Well, you got an 18-year-old guy you just drafted. Like, why would I go there? Or like at that point, Kobe was in the league for a couple years, I think. But it's just like, but let's say he goes there and he can't win because you just don't have the firepower, right? You don't have Shaq, and then it becomes a thing like, oh, was he carried by Jordan? Sort of like in the NFL, what the narrative around Bill Belichick has been ever since Tom Brady left, right? It's like, oh, was he carried by Brady? Kind of thing. And you start to wonder. It's like, all right, if they're like only getting in as a 6-7 seed, getting bounced in the first round or getting bounced in the second round, and then they're like, well, how good is this triangle really? Triangle not so good when you don't have Michael Jordan, right? And even though they had that 1 year without Jordan, they got into the second round, lost in 7, I think, to the Knicks, and you just, even he showed success there, but the end of the thing is like, oh, you were unable to win a title without arguably the greatest player of all time, right? It's like, oh, good, congratulations, you won titles with the best player to ever play basketball, right? And that becomes the narrative about him, right? Because his years in LA, that's when Zen Master came into play. That's when he started getting book deals. That's when he started being like the star Phil Jackson, whereas before he was the great coach Phil Jackson. And you start to look at him a lot differently, right? Where you say, okay, good for you, but you won a bunch of titles with this great, awesome player. What are you without this awesome player? Oh, just another coach, right? Mm-hmm. And if he's there for that time, who's to say he even lasts that long either? Yeah, it's a similar situation to Kobe. Like within a few years, they probably just like, clean house, get him out of here, get them both out of here, right?
And like I said, that's such a good point because if there's no Shaq in LA, he's going to be looking at a 21-year-old Kobe Bryant and be like, that's not enough. That's not enough. Even if he feels like he has some MJ, even if he has MJ in him, I don't have somebody to pair up. I can't do it with just him. And there's no one else here, and maybe let's say there is Chris Webber. Maybe he doesn't believe Chris Webber can take him. So maybe he just like, nah, maybe does he stay retired? Or is he shooting for another team? The
thing is, he wants to implement the triangle, right?
Yeah.
So you want good players for the triangle. At that point in his career, Kobe was not a great triangle player, right? Because he wanted to shoot, and like you hear, like we all watch The Last Dance, you always heard Jordan say, well, like, in Phil's system, you're taking the ball out of my hands, and that's what Kobe wanted, right? He wanted the ball in his hands because he has that Jordan kind of score first mentality. And you just wonder, like, does Chris Webber do that for him? Does Chris Webber and Kobe make him want to run the triangle in that way?
Chris Webber was a good passer out of the post, so like he kind of fits the triangle.
You wonder, right? You just wonder if it would be alluring enough for him to say, all right, I think we can agree without Chris Webber, like obviously this Chris Webber thing is a complete hypothetical by us, but without him, you're like, oh yeah, he's not going there, right? But with him, you start to think maybe. But again, we said the ceiling with Kobe, even as he ascended, and Chris Webber at that point in time, well, wasn't what it was with Shaq. So again, it becomes a thing. If he keeps getting bounced out of the Western Conference Finals or the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, do we say, see, this is what happens when you don't have Jordan, and the flip side of that, Chris, is does it elevate Jordan's legacy even more? Because if he flames out in LA, it's like, man, can you believe Jordan won 6 titles with that bum of a coach? And then you start to say, oh, maybe Jordan really is unquestioned. Like
he's the
I don't care about Kareem. I don't care about anybody else. He's really undisputed. He becomes Gretzky in that way, like Gretzky is in hockey. Like you say, who's the greatest hockey player? Everyone says Gretzky. No one debates you.
Even if you don't even know about hockey, you're like, yeah, Gretzky.
Yeah, it's Gretzky.
Like billion goals. Yeah,
exactly. It's Gretzky. He's got titles, he's got goals. He did multiple franchises, whatever. And that becomes an interesting thing when it comes to Phil Jackson, is because him not being there and Shaq not being there obviously changes Phil's legacy, changes Kobe's legacy. It changes Jordan's legacy in a weird way as well, which is just kind of crazy to think about. These are high level names in basketball lore and history, right? And it's not just some random dude, right? These are big names whose the way that we view them could be forever shifted if this move never happens.
Yeah, because you think about it, the Spurs are just coming off a championship year before Phil comes in, and they won in the lockout year, but they dismantled the Lakers. They swept them that year.
Yep.
So Phil's obviously if Shaq's not in it, that doesn't happen and all that. But
I mean, what do the Spurs become at that point?
Yeah, and do the Spurs just run through the West and they're
do they rip off 4 in a row? I mean, it's just
are they because they've never won back to back, I believe, right? They've never won back to back, so maybe that's back to back, or even more. We're talking about maybe they're the next Bulls and that they have the 3-peats and all that, and it kind of changes how the Spurs, because everybody says, well, they're not a true dynasty because they never won back to back, right? That's what we hear. Even though I consider them a dynasty.
I disagree with
because then they had a long tenure and they won championships. So yeah, it wasn't back to back, but I don't consider just because you went back to back you're a dynasty and all that.
Right.
But do they rip off 3? Duncan have 6, 7? Is he? And then we're like, oh, is Duncan the greatest big man of all time? So like for Duncan and all that. But I think the Phil Jackson element of this is very interesting, because it's like, is this it for Phil? Does he look at the situation? Or Shaq's still in Orlando? There's nothing out there for me. There's nothing that I can feel confident with. I can take this team over the top. I'm trying to think of teams that were maybe just missing the right coach to get them to that next step. Does he look at other? I probably should have think about it more with the Phil, but they brought it up. I never thought about that. I'm like, that's good. I'm just trying to think. Does he look at other situations to try to coach that team that there's the coach away to, And I
think there was Dallas in that time was an interesting team. Maybe
Dallas with Dirk and Nash and Finley and all those guys. Maybe he considers them. Who else? I'm trying to think off the dome. I would have said like New York or something, but that's when we started to fade and Pat was no longer Patrick Ewing.
That's when you were implementing the Houston Sprewell era, right? Canby era, and LJ, those guys.
But those guys are starting to, Larry Johnson starting to, the knee is starting to
get Nets back then.
The Nets are interesting. When did J Kidd get there?
That was like early 2000s, I want to say, right? Which is right around this time, right? If he waits a year, maybe he goes to the Nets, and he has a little bit of familiarity there. I mean, it could go any number of ways.
There's a lot of ways. He could stay retired and just live off. Hey, he won 6 rings and all that, and don't have to take that risk of maybe hurting his leg. Because I always felt like, towards the like when he got to the Knicks and all that, there was always the rumblings like, is he going to coach the team? He's going to coach the team and all that. And I always felt like he didn't want to hurt his legacy, because he didn't feel like
that was a bad team.
It wasn't the team that he felt like he can win with. So he wasn't going to try and hurt, because then we heard, he only want to coach home games and all that. He didn't want to take that chance. So I wonder if this is the same feeling he has if there's no Shaq in LA, and he's just like, I don't see another team that I feel comfortable that could take them over the top to help win a championship. So I'm just going to stay put. I think that's an interesting element. And then that changes too. Like, that changes a lot, so it's very fascinating, Shaq's, because it's and to go to the Kobe stuff, like we look at Kobe differently. And then, how we look at Kobe now, and God rest his soul and all that, but 20 years, with one team, all the great moments, and even the downs and all that with the struggles he had in the mid 2000s after Shaq left and all that, but then getting back. But even though it was down, we saw a different version of Kobe, 37 points a game and all that, the 81 point game and all that. happened? We get that, and how magical that was because if we knew what was
Yeah,
behind.
Kobe's story isn't Kobe's story, right?
It's not the
Without
same.
Shaq. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, we don't have that love. Players don't have that same love, because like you said, and T Mac, you're always going to go back to T Mac, and you're around the same age as me and all that. I remember having arguments in the lunchroom, like who's better, T Mac or Kobe. These were real art, and obviously we're with all the young people watching the game, like they don't understand. Like we used to have battles.
That was
like,
a debate.
no,
Yeah.
T Mac is better. No, Kobe's better. Yeah, no, but he has Shaq and all that. That was always the argument. Wow, he had Shaq though. If T Mac had Shaq, all that. He would have done the same thing and all that.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be like, if this doesn't happen, if Shaq stays in Orlando, which is still crazy that a 24-year-old big man that good you let walk. Omar,
it's crazy. It's crazy.
That wouldn't happen
never
in today's
happens.
day. It
never happens. These guys now 9 years. They're basically locked in. It's
think about it. All right,
no way.
You sign. Let's say if you're as good as Shaq, you could probably be a top 3 pick, whatever. He was the number 1 pick. You probably sign. You sign your rookie deal and all that, and you get your rookie max after year 4. That's probably a 4-year deal. So that's 8 years before you could finally hit free agency. So you're in your, let's say he comes out as a 19-year-old. He's 26, 27, and then you hit free agency. Not when you're 23, 24 years old.
And Shaq wasn't one and done. That's
and Shaq was there, and Shaq was a 2-3 year player at LSU.
Yeah, which is just crazy to think about. Like how different that is from what would happen today, and really what was happening then. Guys stayed with their teams for a long time. But I mean that just probably speaks to just how in demand and how great Shaq was at that time. One other thing to mention here, Chris, is how do we view the Lakers franchise here as a whole if this doesn't happen, right? Like we've kind of articulated a bunch of different scenarios in which maybe they don't win as much. And, the Lakers at that point, let's just say the dynasty doesn't happen, right? Like we've kind of alluded to. You end up in a situation where you had one great era.
That's it. Man.
You become the Sixers, right? From the 80s. In that point, right? Where you're just like, one great era, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
You're not in the same conversation as Boston, which had multiple great eras, and that just the Lakers brand just takes a massive hit if Shaq doesn't sign there, because at that point you're just another okay team in the West. You get surpassed by the Spurs, and then in later times, the Warriors and all that. And then you become a distant memory. And that way you kind of become like the Knicks in a weird way. Like where you have your era in the 70s, you're awesome. And then what are you? Nothing.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And then think about it. Who's a free agent, in what, 2018, 2019? LeBron James. That doesn't happen. He doesn't think about going to He's a Laker. He's a Laker because of what he saw growing up, seeing Shaq and Kobe win championships and all that. And seeing Shaq and going through the battles, being in the NBA when Kobe won a championship with Paul Gasol and those guys and Lamar Odom. You eliminate that, like you said, it's like, oh well, yeah, they were good, but they were good in the 80s and stuff. Like I didn't live in that. Like I was born in the 80s, but I didn't grow up. I grew up in the Jordan era when Jordan was down.
Right. Yeah. And
now that's a distant memory because nobody's gonna care about that. That's growing up in LeBron's time.
I mean at that point maybe LeBron
does he entertain going somewhere else? It's not the Lakers and all that, so that changes. That's another layer of what changes the league if Shaq doesn't live, because now we don't know the Kobe stuff. Maybe Kobe's not even a Laker, maybe he's somewhere else. Phil Jackson, well, if he's coaching another team, or maybe he's retired, and now leads up to, well, LeBron doesn't, maybe he goes to the Clippers, maybe the Clippers are something. They build off that Doc stuff.
Maybe he goes to the Spurs, right? If the Spurs are becoming the dynasty, right, around that time, at that point, maybe you say, oh, maybe
he comes LeBron to New York. Maybe he's in New York, because the Lakers, man, the Lakers are a mess, but they had their run, and maybe I go in, maybe he makes this there's a different layer to the Shell Shaq now going, and now you got the LeBron Lakers thing. Because like I said, he's not entertaining the Lakers if they're irrelevant, and there is no, like I said, they're known for Showtime. All right, that's cool. It's like the Raiders, like they were,
They're good
like
back
the Cowboy,
then,
the Cowboy, they were good in the '90s, but it's 2019 at this point. Whatever, he's a free agent. They haven't won a playoff. They haven't been to the NFC Championship, so it's gonna kind of be that same where it's like, I don't want to do all that. It's like they are a flash in the pan. So it's like,
and then you start looking at like Genie Bus in a different way, because like, oh yeah, see, not your father, you couldn't get it done, and whereas she got it done, as obviously with the LeBron year, but also the later part of Kobe's tenure as well. So it just shows you like a whole entire viewpoint of a franchise changed, really, in essence, because of this one move, and it's just this domino effect that you really, when you really sit down and think about how many moving parts could have been impacted just by this one move.
Omar,
happening.
One thing, and it just came up.
Yeah,
who they beat in the finals? They beat the Sixers in the finals. Let's say there's no Lakers.
The Iverson era, yeah.
Iverson, he wins a championship that year.
Oh,
think about how different
we view him.
And we view him in a very high regard, right? He is viewed as because he's 5'10" and just he brought it every night and all that. But think how different if he wins a championship that year. Because if it's any other team in the Lakers, they have a shot to win. They have a shot. So
you're not dealing with a super team.
Exactly. You're not dealing because the biggest thing is they couldn't stop Shaq. Shaq was just obliterating all their bigs.
Yeah, R.I.P. Theo Ratliff on that one, man.
So like they're abusing all their bigs, So, and then the Nets too are another. Jason Kidd wins a championship as the guy. Now he won it in Dallas, but it's different when you're the guy.
When you're the guy, yeah.
Now imagine how different he looked.
I mean, think about how that changes the narrative of basketball fandom in New York City, right?
There's 3 players in that three-peat that the Lakers beat. That if there is no Lakers, Reggie Miller, Allen Iverson, Jason Kidd. Guys who didn't win. Now, I mentioned Jason Kidd won championship, but he was a kind of a role player in Dallas and all. Big part, but he wasn't Jason Kidd. Yeah. So those are 3 guys in their prime. If they had won a champion, look at how we're not talking about them the same way we talk about, Dan Marino, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley. Reggie Miller is considered maybe a top 3 shooting guard of all time. Allen Iverson, pound for pound, the best little guy, in NBA history, with an MVP, all that. And then Jason Kidd, we're like, oh my God, is he on the same level as Magic?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, the narrative changes, right? Because Shaquille O'Neal stayed in Orlando. But, of course, that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. At the end of this day, it didn't happen. He leaves Orlando, and we got what we got. We got the story. We were able to see him go through the struggles a little bit. They draft this, while drafting this young kid from Lower Merion High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, being patient with that young man, going through the ups and downs, getting their ass beat by the Spurs and Utah, then finding the Zen master, and then taking off Stratosphere and all that. Obviously, they went through their downs, and then the Lakers got back up. But Shaq leaving, and then we see with the Orlando side, the downfall. Penny Hardaway gets hurt more, and he eventually leaves. And now it's like, wow, we had two guys who were people would kill to have faces of the franchise. Like, it's hard to get one guy. We got 2 of them. We didn't get anything out of this, really. And it's sad in a way, but I'm sure Lakers fans are like, oh, who cares? They're sad and all that because we were able to get.
We got our rings,
We got back to being Showtime and get back that aura we talk about,
right?
And get back to being Los Angeles Lakers. But Omar, there's just so many layers And we could probably go to
Go
even
on.
more stuff because it's just fascinating how many different branches are to this that can go so many
Mhm.
places that changes. Like we just mentioned, this changed what LeBron would have done a few years ago. There's no chance he's going to the Lakers if there's no Kobe and everything he brought to there, and there's no Shaq and all that. And what does he do? Because now he changes a different franchise, and now whoever that franchise is, their whole outlook for the last 4 or 5 years is different.
Mhm.
That's is the most. This is what's fascinating about doing this because you get into these and like you think about a bunch of things. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about the Phil Jackson part because
Mhm.
maybe he doesn't coach. He's definitely not coaching, most likely. So there's just so many things. But Shaq ultimately he left the Orlando Magic, goes to the Lakers, has some of the most dominant. As a young kid watching this, I'm sure you feel that same.
Mhm.
It was just absolutely fascinating to see a man that big dominate the game of basketball. Where there
Couldn't
are
guard him.
teams,
You can't
there are
stop him.
teams that would just get, hey, you're 7 foot 280, you're on the team. We
You're in
don't
there.
care if you can
Yeah.
play. We just need your six. You have 6 fouls. Use them. Use them. And
Literally, yeah.
he literally dominated like that run they had when they played Philly, 2001, where they
Mhm.
lost one playoff game,
Yep.
like where they in a Western Conference they ran through. It's some of the most dominating stuff I've ever seen. Like when they played the Nets, I'm like, oh my god, he is a man amongst points. He's playing against high school kids.
Yeah.
I
It
felt
wasn't
bad
fair. It
for
wasn't
Todd
fair.
McCullough and Jason Collins and King. I'm
All those
like,
guys.
oh, I'm like, they have no chance. And to know that you go into arena, and I don't know if this is the same now. I don't think guys go into the arena and be like, all right, no. I think guys in McCon, but like to go there and be like, oh, we got no shot. That 32, he gonna dominate us. 34 gonna
Mhm.
dominate us. That's something we may not see. We may not see a player like
Yeah,
this
the
ever.
closest you probably got it now is Giannis, right? I mean,
Giannis and
that's
all that.
why you get the comparisons. But even like in today's game, you're like, well, we'll sag off him on the 3-point line and
Yeah,
just hope for the best there. Let him get his numbers. Let's just stop everybody else.
yeah. It's fascinating, and like I said, there are so many more layers to this, but that's going to conclude this episode of What if Shaq never left the Orlando Magic? Omar, this was fun. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
man.
this. I think when people will listen to this 2-part series, they're going to enjoy it. But Omar, this was a blast, brother. This was a lot of fun, and
Yeah,
this
man.
is just the
Just
first
the beginning.
episode of the beginning of what we got in store. We got a lot more in the tank, and we're actually going to work on that after this and all that. But Omar, man, this was fun, brother.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it, man. Can't wait to the next one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I know Chris and I both enjoyed delivering it to you. So make sure you tune in for future episodes of the What If series.
Yes, and we will. If you follow us on our socials, I have my social handle right here, Off the Ball Pod. You see Omar ZHRN. Follow him and all that. We'll have more updates on what the second uh, episode will be about. So make sure you follow. We're going to be in the lab working on that. But I hope you guys enjoy this. Please leave any feedback. We'll be dropping this on YouTube, dropping this on all the podcast, feeds and all that. Please, any I know a lot of people are anticipating this, so that's got me excited. Got people hitting me up. When is it dropping? When is it dropping? So that makes me feel good. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this series and all that. But that's going to be the first episode of What If Shaq never left the Orlando Magic. Please, like I said, leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, whatever podcast platform you listen to. Also on YouTube, give us a sub, like, comment, let us know, give us some ideas for other episodes that you want us to get into, any other scenarios you want us to dive into. Please leave a comment and all that. But appreciate the support for everybody. But on that note, be well, be safe, take care.